Never since the beginning of the war have been as many Russians in favor of the beginning of immediate ceasefire negotiations. The Ukrainians receive additional air defense, which is direly needed as continued attacks on Ukrainian airfields prove. But we'll talk about this as well as about the developments along the front lines in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. I got two books, by the way, but I'll thank the donors later in the video. We'll start off with a report about a Ukrainian attack on the OEMK. Now, this is a plant from the Russian side that is an integrated steel company. And according to reports, the Ukrainians were able to cut the electricity supply to this plant, which then heavily damaged it, according to reports. The plant itself creates the heat to melt metals by electricity, and then it's kind of obvious that the moment the electricity is gone, the metal cools down and then could clog and solidify wherever it is and thus damage the material. How expensive, how problematic it is to clean it afterwards is probably dependent on the exact design, but definitely outside of my knowledge. But at least according to reports, the Ukrainians have done significant damage to this plant with this attack. The Ukrainians also attacked a powder plant, a gunpowder plant in Kotovsk. Videos show explosions in the place, so the damage is unclear yet, but at least it was hit. That much is proven by now. We also have new videos that of refineries and oil plants being hit. The Ukrainians keep attacking the Russian oil infrastructure over the last few days. They also attacked the Primorsk-Akhtarsk air base with drones and missiles. This base is usually being used by the Russians to launch their Sukhoi 25 ground support planes, the close air support. No clear indication how much damage was done. I have not found anything that would prove that even a plane was hit or how many were damaged or destroyed in this attack. From Sevastopol, there were also reports about explosions. No details about the damage here either. Russia has continued its strikes on the Ukrainian Air Force after the initial strike on an airfield that probably destroyed and damaged several Sukhoi 27. The next day, they destroyed a Mi-24 Hind combat helicopter, and now there was a fresh attack on the airbase in Kryvyi Rih, or close to Kryvyi Rih here, and here they've destroyed a Sukhoi 25 and a MiG-29 interceptor. Now, it's not completely clear how many of those two were actually in working order. The Sukhoi 25 looked like a decoy, but the MiG-29 looked like it's in operation. Obviously, the exact knowledge I cannot provide you, but it seems like the Ukrainians might have actually lost another combat plane in this attack. Another proof that the Russians can operate far behind the front line with their reconnaissance drones and then use that reconnaissance, that information they gained to strike Ukrainian airfields with Iskander ballistic missiles. On the northern front, there are reports that the Russians have taken here in Kharkiv Oblast, Sotnytsky Kozachok, this town here. This is being said by both Ukrainian as well as Russian sources, but the Ukrainians at the same time are calling it a small raid. It's unclear whether in this very moment the Russians still have a presence in place and how solid it is, but from my understanding, the thing is that towns like this, which directly border the international border, are evacuated, both from military personnel, from border guards, as well as from civilians, as it would make no sense putting soldiers into this place here, where even just bringing them food risks significant losses if the Russians see it. So usually the line should be a few kilometers further back. So this town was likely completely abandoned, and the Russians just went in and raised some flags. At least that's my understanding at this moment. The Ukrainians were successful in Lyboke, though. We have a geolocation in the south and we have one in the northeast here. This showed a video showed the Russians shelling it with their artillery, both here in the south as well as here in the northeast, indicating that either Hlyboka has fallen completely or that the Ukrainians have entered it in the south and then bypassed it in the north and then turned right to maybe try to create a turning maneuver, force the Russian to withdraw in this direction or even to cut them off. It's obviously unclear to me at this point, but we see that the Ukrainians have had success in Hlyboka very recently. Whether the town is liberated or not, I cannot say. It doesn't seem to be. I haven't even seen serious Ukrainian accounts claiming that it was liberated. But we do know they have had some success here. The Russians, on the other hand, had success in Vovchansk. Here we have a fresh geolocation of the Russians here in the high rises here in this area. 2 days earlier, the Ukrainians were actually seen here west of the road, but this is, as said, 2 or 3 days earlier, so I can't really say that the Ukrainians supposedly now have a bridgehead here. In fresh Russian maps, by the way, this is now connected, so they don't they claim that they aren't cut off. I have no real proof what is the case here, but I do have proof that the Ukrainians were successful up here, because there we have a geolocation of the Ukrainians moving up into the northeastern corner here, and they have been spotted by the Russians up here, so there they were successful as well. On the eastern front, we have some small development in the direction of Pivchene. Here we have the Russians having advanced along this tree line here, roughly, if you see it directly south of it, roughly to this point. I have a geolocation here as well, and as you can see, it's a little to the, in quotation mark, left of the dead south of it, so a little to the west here, which should mean that they have advanced roughly until here. So a small minor success in this area, but a success nonetheless. That was it north of the Seversky Donetsk that I can record, and south of the Seversky Donetsk, the Russians have now clearly entered the town of Spirne. Spirne is contested for quite a while already. The Russians and the Ukrainians were fighting over it for a while, and now you can see that a Russian flag was raised. It was raised on the easternmost house of this settlement here, of the houses that were built up here, but still it shows that the Russians at the very least have reached until here. Not if not, some claims are that they have taken the whole town. I have not seen visual evidence of this, but looking at it, we see that these here are probably an agricultural setup. This is this here, so they are roughly at this point now. They have definitely had some success in this area. At Chasiv Yar, I do not see any proof of change in territory, but we have a change south of Klishivka. Here the Russians have advanced until to this point here. We see them down here. Now the deep state map claims that Klishivka itself is still contested, and that I don't know, it's not occupied, but now we see the Russians advancing lower to here. So in my understanding, Klishivka is in Russian hands. We've seen the Russians down here. We've seen them up here. I think the map here is not accurate. Deep state map is significantly lagging behind the current developments, at least in the region of Klishivka. So the front line is actually looking less good for Ukraine here in this region than I think Deep State map is currently portraying it. Further south, close to Avdiivka, we have some changes. Now the Russians continue having successes in the direction of New York. Here we have a fresh geolocation in the east of Yurivka. Here the Russians have claimed they completely occupied it, and if this here is all of that town, then they actually have occupied it. And on the map we can see that they have advanced roughly until, let me quickly check again, we have this road here that is an indication, and it's more or less on the east of it, so they are roughly here at this point on the eastern part. They are advancing along the river towards the north as well. A significant success of the Russians over the last week or so, week or 10 days maybe. In the west of it, the Russians are also successful. They have advanced in the direction of Lozuvatske. Here in this direction, another geolocation we have here is showing them right east of the town. This should be more or less here by now, so the Russians keep pushing towards the west here as well. That was it. All that I find from the current developments along the front line. Nothing south here seems to have changed over the past 3 days. Since my last situation report, nothing in Krasnohorivka, nothing west Oblast, the border of the Oblast, south of Velika Novosilka, wherever, so nothing seems to have changed. The Russians, so we switch to the overall news. The Russians have arrested the commander of the 83rd Air Force Air Assault Brigade because of fraud. His unit is currently being employed in the Kharkiv offensive. So this up here, there is his unit, and it's the 83rd Air Assault Brigade that supposedly has some people cut off here. This is at least what's being said from the commenters and analysts and from local sources, that here is the 83rd Brigade. Also important that this the commander that was arrested here, he was the one to command the unit that committed the massacre in Bucha. He is now arrested by the Russians, but not for this, obviously, but for something else. In troop generation, we have claims that Chinese companies are now working with Russian companies to copy the Shahid drones, and they are already testing prototypes. According to reports, kits are already being delivered to Russia, where they are being remodeled for attack drones. I have no idea. I guess you can build a Shahid drone and not place an explosive inside and claim that it's for, I don't know, crop dusting or something, and the Russians then modify it by placing a bomb in it. It seems to be something like this, because here we are not talking about a surveillance drone for civilian use that is being used to drop bombs. This is, according to the reports, those are basically copies from Shahid drones that are just being made in China, where obviously the West and the United States do not want to acknowledge that this is lethal aid that Russia is already receiving from China out of the political consequences that would have to be drawn from this experience. Still though, right now, according to the reports, China is thinking about delivering fully ready to use combat drones as well. So China is creeping closer to a more intense involvement in the war, as obviously the Western nations' red lines are not deterrents enough to stop China from continuing. Russia claims, Medvedev claims that Russia has recruited 190,000 volunteers in the first 6 months of the war. This would be remarkably close to Ukraine's past estimates of 30,000 a month, as 6 months would obviously mean 180,000. And the Russians claim that they got more volunteers after the Crocus attack in Moscow that would more or less make up the numbers. In the past, we've seen that the Russians are remarkably close to international estimates in a lot of things. Now they sugarcoat it. For instance, they claim they built new tanks, whereas the majority of them came out of depots. But the overall numbers seem to be obviously somewhat rounded up, but no more than 10% away from the reality. So we have to expect that unless something has dramatically changed, this is still more or less what Russia has recruited here over the past 6 months to make up for its losses. And that's the point. The Russians are still capable of making up with their losses. We talked in the past that recruitment is getting harder, that the Russians have to pay more, but at least as of now, the higher payment seems to be successful enough. And obviously, they're also recruiting abroad, and here Narendra Modi is obviously not too happy about Indians having to fight or fighting about the Russians, and now they are trying to get Russia to agree to cancel the contracts with Indian citizens early, so they are being relieved from the Russian armed forces and can return home. There are also continued reports about Russian soldiers being sent to the front line while being wounded. This video is currently circulating. Now, of course, we could claim that they were wounded and are on their process to withdraw. We don't see guns here. They are clearly wounded. That seems to be bandages on the legs, even though theoretically it could be their IFF system as well. But we see them here. Yeah, That's not what you expect a military to be. As said, like, I do not see the context of this video, but it clearly looks like it's this, and we have, like, it's a sign of Russians using wounded personnel along the front line, and the Russian mill bloggers are continuing to report that this is happening. So we are at a point where it's definitely not Ukrainian propaganda. The Russians have definitely sent soldiers to the front line that are incapable of fighting. There are examples of people having cast limbs and still being on the front line. This is a reality at this very moment. In the political sphere, we have some news as well. In the press conference with Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, Putin has said that a ceasefire is not in the Russian interest, as Ukraine would use it for reorganization of its armed forces. Instead, Russia is aiming for a final solution or a final conclusion. Let's put it in less heavy historical words. Russia is looking for a final conclusion of the project. Basically, he says that he wants to continue pressing on until Ukraine gives in and he achieves what he gets. So far, at least, the Russians seem to be more or less supportive of this. The Levada Center, which is a Russian independent survey institute, which is generally considered to be accurate, so not biased in favor of the government. Here they are saying that 58% want negotiations, despite the length of the war, but only 58%. And while this is the highest value ever, it's still those are that want ceasefire negotiations. They don't demand that Russia is withdrawing from the war, that Russia is going to leave. They simply want, it would be nice if the war was to end now, but to expect them willing to give up the annexed oblasts is probably fundamentally wrong. 48% are saying that they are proud of Russia because of the war. 33%, on the other hand, are afraid and have anxiety and so on because of the war. 1/3 is believing that Russia would be justified to use nuclear weapons. So a usage of nuclear weapons would have the support of 1/3 of the population, and 44% supporting the military in Ukraine decisively. 32% rather support the military in Ukraine. So in total, 76% still support more or less the military operation inside in the war against Ukraine. 2/3 are blaming the United States and NATO for the war and the victims of war, and that has risen from 53% last year. And here, so a rise of over 10%. That's a clear success sign, I guess, for Putin, as he manages to put the blame on strategic enemies of Russia that he identified, and thus will give him support that people might not want to continue the war, but having the US and NATO to blame makes it unlikely that the Russian public will quickly demand a cessation of the hostilities. Ukraine is receiving aid, though. At the same time, Estonia is delivering Mistral missiles, air defense missiles. The United States are buying air defense missiles from the factories, from what I understand, at a value of $2.2 billion US. It includes NASAMS and Patriot missiles, and they are also making a new aid package at the size of 150 million. It includes Hawk air defense missiles. It includes new missiles for the HIMARS system, 155 and 105 artillery shells, 81 millimeter mortar shells, anti-tank guided weapons, be it TOW and Javelin or AT-4. And Germany has now officially handed over the third Patriot air defense system for Ukraine. Before I finish, let me quickly thank the donors that sent me books. I want to thank Michael Perry for The Accidental Superpower, the Peter Zeihan book. Peter Zeihan has an interesting style that I'm not fully agreeing with, but it's still very interesting to pick his brain and basically see what he does. So thank you very much for enabling it to me. And E.N.A. has given me Shattered Sword, The Untold Story of the Battle of Midway. I actually already read that book in the past. It's fantastic. It's the it was, at least when I read it, the best work about the Battle of Midway. I unfortunately had to sell the book when I moved to Panama, so thanks to the mostly anonymous donor, it's back in my hand now. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the encouraging words as well. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment. What do you think about the current developments? And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. And in the description, you also find a link to my Amazon wishlist in case you also want to do something nice for me and give me a nice surprise when I pick up my packages. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.